In the far reaches of a distant galaxy, nestled in a small, desolate planet named Kairos, lived a widow named Ilari. Kairos was a place known for its vast, barren deserts and relentless storms, a planet that had never known peace since the great wars that tore apart its once thriving civilization. The planet's population had dwindled over the years, and many of its survivors had been abandoned by neighboring civilizations, left to die in the cruel embrace of the unforgiving landscape. Ilari's story was one of tragedy. A widow with a son, Caro, who had inherited her beauty and hope but little else. Ilari had once been a part of a community of traders, moving from one galaxy to the next, selling goods and making a living. Her husband, Velder, had been a strong, reliable man, a skilled technician who fixed the intricate machines that kept their community running. But one fateful day, disaster struck. The once peaceful world of Kairos was ravaged by a new war, one that pitted the locals against an external, powerful force that saw Kairos as a strategic location in the galaxy. Velder died in a raid that left the once thriving marketplace in ruins. After his death, Ilari was forced to raise her son alone in a hostile world. She tried to hold on, but the resources on Kairos were scarce, and her survival skills were tested every day. Her husband's death had left a gaping hole in her heart, one that she could never seem to fill. The pain of loss mingled with the cold reality of their situation. Their water reserves were running low, and food was scarce. Ilari knew that Caro's future was uncertain, and every day she feared the inevitable: hunger, thirst, and death. For months, she did everything she could to make ends meet. She scavenged what was left of the ruins, using her husband's tools to repair machines, searching for supplies wherever she could find them. But as the seasons changed, the situation grew increasingly dire. Her son grew weaker and weaker from hunger, and his once bright eyes became dull, his limbs frail. The young boy would often ask her, "Mom, when will it be better?" Her heart broke every time, but she had no answers. One day, in a particularly desperate moment, Ilari could feel the last remnants of hope slipping away. Her once strong resolve had begun to crack under the weight of her sorrow and exhaustion. The thought of her son dying in her arms, without anyone to care for him, filled her with a kind of unbearable grief. There was no one left to help them, no ships from other planets, no sign of aid. Kairos was forgotten by the greater universe, a dead world with only the memory of its former inhabitants lingering in the wind. Then, as if the universe had listened to her silent cry, something unexpected happened. A ship appeared on the horizon, an unfamiliar, sleek vessel that cut through the dusty skies like a blade. It was a human ship, a single-engine scout that had strayed off course while exploring uncharted space. The human pilot, a seasoned explorer named Captain Alexander, had made a mistake in his navigation, leading him to the edge of Kairos. But when he saw the dying planet below, his curiosity and sense of compassion took over. Captain Alexander had been a solitary man, used to exploring the far corners of the universe, his only company being the stars and the cold expanse of space. His mission was to chart unknown territories, but he had seen enough devastation in his travels to know that some things were more important than scientific data. As a ship touched down on the barren surface of Kairos, he felt a strange pull in his heart, urging him to investigate further. He found Ilari and Caro in a small shelter made from the remnants of an old building. Ilari was sitting on the ground, cradling her son, her face gaunt from hunger and exhaustion. Caro was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and weak. The sight of them broke Captain Alexander's heart. He had seen many planets, many people, but nothing compared to the devastation he saw before him. Are you okay?" Captain Alexander asked gently, kneeling down beside Ilari. His voice was soft, almost as if speaking too loudly would break the fragile moment of stillness that hung in the air. Ilari looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from days of thirst. "Why are you here? There is nothing for you on this world." Captain Alexander shook his head. "I couldn't just leave. I couldn't ignore what I saw." His gaze shifted to Caro, who was now trembling in his mother's arms. "He's too young to suffer like this." For a moment, Ilari didn't know what to say. She had given up hope of any rescue, of any salvation. But here was a stranger, a human who had come from the far reaches of the galaxy, offering something she hadn't dared to hope for. "Help. Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He is all I have left. We have nothing." Without another word, Captain Alexander stood up and walked back to his ship. His mind was racing, and his heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't just leave them to die. As an explorer, he had seen the galaxy's beauty, but he had also witnessed its cruelty. Yet in that moment, he felt a deep sense of responsibility. He couldn't walk away from this, not without trying. He returned to the shelter minutes later, carrying medical supplies, food rations, and water. He gently began to treat Caro, applying a cold compress to his fevered forehead and feeding him small sips of water. Ilari watched in stunned silence as the human worked. She had no words, only a deep sense of gratitude that she didn't know how to express. It felt too surreal. As the hours passed, Caro's condition began to stabilize. Captain Alexander kept watch over them, ensuring they had enough to eat and drink. He shared stories of his travels, trying to lift their spirits, but mostly, he let his actions speak louder than words. He understood the power of silence, of kindness without expectation. Finally, after a long, arduous night, Caro's fever broke, and he began to regain his strength. The color slowly returned to his cheeks, and he opened his eyes to find a stranger sitting beside him, offering a warm smile. "You're going to be all right now," Captain Alexander reassured him. Ilari, tears streaming down her face, hugged her son tightly. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to thank you." Captain Alexander smiled softly. "You don't have to. Just know that there's always hope, even in the darkest of times." The next day, as Ilari and Caro prepared to leave the shelter and move toward a safer place, Captain Alexander made arrangements for them to board his ship. He would take them to a nearby space station where they could get the care they needed. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a start. The journey would be long, but with hope rekindled in their hearts, Ilari and Caro were no longer alone. As they lifted off from Kairos, the barren world fading beneath them, Ilari looked at Captain Alexander with gratitude in her eyes. She had known only loss, only despair. But now, thanks to the kindness of one human stranger, she saw the faintest glimmer of a future for her son. A future built on compassion, and the belief that even the smallest act of kindness could change the course of someone's life forever.